You're listening to the Manifest Your Greatness podcast, and this is episode number 65. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this episode of the Manifest Your Greatness podcast. Before we get started, I just wanted to say that I have noticed that many more people are taking advantage of all the free resources on manifestyourgreatness.com. As I mentioned before, there are free ebooks, there's a blog, there's lots of additional free information, and it's all just available for you. It's all free, so definitely take advantage of that. I'm glad that more and more people are taking advantage of it. There's another recent ebook that was added that I've created called Stop Living Life as a Victim. Highly recommend taking a look at that and downloading it for free if you haven't already. So with that, today's episode is entitled The Underestimated Cost of Fearing the Worst. The underestimated cost of fearing the worst. Now, what do we mean by that, right? So I'm going to start with an example. So I recently moved, as many of you know. I have a nice new studio here, a nice new location to live at as well. And we were moving in and getting everything ready to go. And we just happened to notice that there was a bulge in one of the water lines coming into the washing machine. And I mean, this thing looked like it could burst at any second. So of course we were freaked out, right? We were panicking and just worried, what if this bursts and water gets everywhere? So the first instinct, of course, was to shut the valve off, the water valve. I realized it was a valve I'd never seen before. It wasn't like a typical turn water off this way, that way type thing. And I wasn't sure what to do, and I didn't want to make it worse. So I got on the phone and called our handyman, and he was in the middle of a job, said he'd be over as soon as he could. And as soon as he could, ended up being the next day. So at the time we asked for help, we didn't know it was going to take that long. And you can imagine that we were all quite worried that perhaps that line would burst and we'd have water everywhere. Now, the reason I bring this up is because we all have areas of our lives where something can burst at any time. There's something going on right now in everyone's lives that we are worried if it went wrong, that life as we know it would end. Like it would be a disaster. There's so many things like that. And what I wanted to talk about today is how fixating on those things that you know are out there, but that you can only control up to a point. You can only prepare, and that's really all you can do. Then you have to just kind of let it go and say, hey, I've done what I can to ensure that this doesn't happen. And if it does happen, I've thought through what we could do to recover from it. But outside of that, continuing to think about it is not really going to do me any good, right? So I'm going to give another example. So I'm sure a lot of people out there know how to drive. If you don't, then one of the things that is very interesting about learning how to drive is that when you start to learn how to drive, you notice everything you could hit. You notice, everything that is out there in front of you, that if you make a mistake, you could, hit someone or hit something or damage something. So you're living in constant fear of hitting something or doing something wrong. And as most drivers know, as you become a more skilled driver, it kind of fades. Then you start being able to really kind of focus on where you're going. You might even have enough time to, pay attention to what's on the radio or whatnot, take in the view, a lot of different things. So as you become more skilled, you're still aware that something terrible could happen, right? But you've trained your mind to look at all the things you can do to get through it or get around it. So when you first start learning how to drive, you're seeing the cars, you're seeing everything that potentially, you could could hit that. And as you become a more skilled driver, you start to be able to see past the cars. You see the road ahead. You notice subtle movements of cars that are around you. You get a sense of the traffic, who's slowing up, who's speeding, who's slowing down, or who's speeding up. You start to notice who's behind you, who's around you. You start to see things before they happen too. You start to see if someone is too close to you, and when you see that, you start thinking about, well, if this person gets dangerously close, what could I do to make sure I get around that? Or if the person in front of me stops suddenly, where can I get out of the way so as not to run into that person? So the point here is that when you stop thinking about all the things that could go wrong, you start seeing all of the things that you can do to move yourself forward, and to get to where you're going safely. And once you start focusing on that, you start seeing more opportunities. Just like the reticular activating system, I've talked about this before, but basically it's this thing that our brain does. And when we start to think about something more often, we start to notice it more often. And the interesting thing about the brain is that you try to tell it not to do something, of course, it's going to do it. So, for example, don't think of an elephant. Everyone thought of an elephant, right? Because you hear elephant and don't think, and it doesn't, you hear the noun, you hear what it is that you're talking about. Now, if I were to say, look at the grass, or think of the grass, and you could be thinking of grass, right? And there could be elephants out there, but if you're thinking of the grass, you're looking at the grass, you're paying attention to the grass. So you're seeing the openness, you're seeing where you can go, where you can move, where you can where you can grow and make progress. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Mark Twain once said that I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened. So, and that's what I really want to talk about today, is that when we live in constant fear of something going wrong, it robs us of our health, because one of the things it does is robs us of our health. It does this by mentally, really making it more difficult for us to relax, making it more difficult for us to sleep, making it more difficult for us to really focus on what we can do in the moment. And that's the other piece of it, that it can be so dangerous if we're always living in constant fear of what could go wrong. We don't see the things we can do now. So we can't live in the moment if we're constantly living in fear. So my suggestion is when you have things that you are worried about, and you have things that you think, oh, if this went wrong, this could be terrible. Take a moment to think about what is in your control and what is not in your control, and then take all of your focus and focus on the former. What is in your control, because that's what you can act on now. What is not in your control is going to be there, and there's really nothing that you can do to influence it. You can prepare, you can think about ways that you can recover if it does happen. But beyond that, if you can't control it, that's really all you can do. And that's where we need to release that. And if we don't, like I was saying before, our health suffers, our focus suffers. So all the things that matter to us get pulled into this abyss of fear, and we have real trouble moving forward and doing what really counts, what's really important, what's really going to help us make forward, and do the things that may ultimately end up making that potential disaster become a non-issue over time anyway, right? So back to my example with the water line. So the next day, the handyman came and replaced it. Nothing, no leak, no nothing, no water all over the floor, nothing. Now, does that mean that it couldn't have happened? No, it doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is that once I had done what I could do to stop the problem from happening, or to and thought about what I could do if it had happened, like, okay, well, where can I move around? What is the most sensitive things that we have on the floor that we need to get off the floor? Once you do that preparation, you make the call, you know someone's coming, that's pretty much all you can do. So I went back to work and started focusing on the things that I could control. And because of that, I was able to get some things that were really important to me done that day. And I was able to focus because I kind of just released that. Yes, I still thought about it, but every time I thought about it, I would bring myself back to my center and say, is there anything I can do about that right now? No, there's not. If there's not, then what can I do right now? Where can I put my focus? So I would like everyone to really think about this because we do it more often than we realize, perhaps. Allow fear to really control our mindset, to really control where our focus lies. Now, I'm not saying we should ignore potential things that could happen around us. There's a difference between being ignorant and ignoring what could happen and preparing or being aware or just understanding and acknowledging what could happen. So I'm not saying to ignore, I'm not saying to dismiss, I'm not saying to stick your head in the sand, but what I am saying is to evaluate each situation and realize really what you can do, what you can't. And if you're able to do that, it's going to be reflected in your health. You're going to be able to get more done. You're going to be able to relax. You're not going to be stressed. And we all know what stress can do, right? It can disrupt so much in our lives. Not only sleep and our health and our appetite and all of that, but even our interactions with people. If we're distracted with fear, we're not even going to be able to be with people 100%, right? And you'll just, I've been called out on this a number of times by friends and family, when they're talking to me and they can tell my mind is on something else, right? And they call me out on it and say, hey, you're not even here, are you? So think about that. It does impact so many aspects of our lives. So that is my challenge to everyone today, is that when you find yourself in a situation and it is something that you're worried about that could go drastically wrong, of course, oftentimes we may exaggerate first and foremost and think the world is going to end if it does happen. So walking ourselves back from the ledge is the first thing, putting things in perspective, but also looking at the situation and really discerning what you can control and what you cannot control. And once you've understood that, focus on what you can control and let the rest just be as it may. There's nothing you can do about it. It doesn't mean you're ignoring it. It doesn't mean you're going to think later, I woulda, coulda, shoulda. You did all that already. You did all that already. You know what you can and can't control. So that is my recommendation for everyone, and that's my challenge. So please give that a try. I think you will find significant benefits and in your health and your daily life and just your overall mood and your ability to focus and get rest and eat well. All these things, of course, that fear and stress can really deprive us of. So that is my episode today, and I want to thank you so much for joining today's episode, and I look forward to spending time again with you on an episode in the near future.